Cashflow Diary podcast, episode 456.
Welcome to yet another exciting episode of the Cashflow Diary podcast, the podcast that teaches you insider tips, tactics, and strategies for creating leverage streams of cash flow into your life. Learn from top-performing entrepreneurs, business owners, investors, and thought leaders from across the globe as they share their secrets to success. Like what you learn on this and other Cashflow Diary podcast episodes? Go to learninvestingnow.com and sign up to receive powerful tips and information that will help you succeed as an entrepreneur and investor. Now, here's your host, investor, entrepreneur, business owner, educator, speaker, author, and master facilitator of Robert Kiyosaki's cash flow game, Jay Massey.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Cashflow Diary podcast. I'm your host, Jay Massey, and I'm glad that you're here today because here's the thing. When it comes down to finding a place to put your capital, that's definitely something that could be very, very challenging. I mean, there's so many opportunities, especially in today's world. But sometimes, instead of looking to the future, what you might want to do is kind of look to the past, or more importantly to the present, and then you could possibly figure out that there's something for you to do right in front of you that you may have never considered before, but that's okay. I have with me today the founders of Harvest Returns. Now, let me tell you why this is important, because if you've ever paid attention to the tax code in the United States, you can get certain benefits for providing certain things. And one of those things happens to be food, which I think is kind of interesting. I love their company name, by the way, Harvest Returns. And we are talking about agricultural investing. Now, before you go, well, Jay, I don't have any interest in that. You do have an interest in cash flow, and I know many of you love the idea of apartment buildings. I have it on good authority that we're going to be able to make some comparisons between the two, which I am looking forward to understanding. As I said, I've got the founders with me, Chris Rawley, as well as Austin Maness. Now, here's the interesting things about these gentlemen that I already appreciate. They both have served in our military. One in the Army, one in the Navy. Now, what's interesting is that they figured that out. They still work well together, and that's amazing for some of you who know exactly what I'm talking about. Texas A&M grads, but most importantly, entrepreneurs who are doing their best to not only do well, but do good. And now they're going to share with us some information that, well, I don't think we've heard before. So help me welcome Chris Rawley and Austin Maness. How you gentlemen doing today?
We're doing great, Jay. Thanks for having us on today.
Thanks, Jay.
Yeah, I'm glad that you guys are here. Now, this being the first time that you guys are here, I have the same question I tend to ask everybody the first time that they're here. Are you ready?
We're ready to go.
We're excited to start.
All right. So I tend to look at today's entrepreneurs a lot like yesterday's superheroes. You know, Wonder Woman, Black Panther, Spider-Man, etc. You get the idea, because I think entrepreneurs and superheroes have a ton of things in common. Occasionally, we can envision ourselves using our superpowers, going out there to save our customers with our products and services, and maybe occasionally dressing up with capes and tights. Now, just like a superhero, an entrepreneur has a beginning. So if you think about it, think about someone like Spider-Man. There was a time he was just a regular college kid going to school. That's all he was trying to do. Take some photos, have some pizza money. And then one day something happens to him, and now he realizes he's got these new abilities, and he gets to choose whether to use them for good or evil. So my question to you guys is as follows. Before, obviously, your company Harvest Returns, before the military, before being in the corporate management positions you have, before, you know, obviously serving our country in various different ways, even before Texas A&M and everything that you guys are known for today, my question to you is, who is Chris and Austin?
Well, Jay, this is Chris, by the way. I grew up in a family of real estate entrepreneurs, and I think that's kind of why real estate and being an entrepreneur is sort of in my blood. My father was involved in self-storage in the early days in Texas in the 70s. So he and his father was involved in drugstores in Texas, and I can even go further back. Back, I had a great grandfather who had a hotel business in Galveston
Yeah.
back when it was the Wild Wild West in the 1800s. So I've always really had a fondness for real estate and real estate investing. And when I left active duty, I started investing in things like single family homes, and then that grew into a little bit of multifamily and some raw land, and that evolved into agriculture. So I am kind of late in the entrepreneurship game. Most started this company in my late 40s. I think a lot of entrepreneurs start earlier than that, but it was a good time to start because I had sort of made a lot of the mistakes I think that maybe younger entrepreneurs haven't done, and I, as you know, it's a hard thing to get into, and I'll let Austin tell a little bit of his story and.
So yeah, Austin here, and I kind of had the typical country bumpkin upbringing.
Are tadpoles about to? Are we about to start talking about tadpoles and frogs and stuff?
We did do some frog gigging when I was young, but my parents met on the 1976 bicentennial wagon train, so that was a great start. And my grandparents were their families were sharecroppers. Great post Great Depression sharecroppers on adjacent land, and that's how they met. So my start was in the ag kind of realm. I remember as a young kid going to the state farmers market in Georgia and helping one of my aunts and uncles sell watermelons and bushels of corn there at the state farmers market. So I've always had that connection to our food source and the land, and we had cows and horses and dogs and chickens and everything that you think that crawls on the earth on our land when I grew up. So going into the Army, that's really where going to Texas A&M, the Army is really where I got my sense of kind of service to others. And then as I transitioned into the civilian world and Chris and I started to work on this project, I could see where what we're doing here goes directly into helping specifically the ag community in another way of raising capital. So that resonated with me as it's my kind of people, but also at the same time, it's also a way to help others, and that really just grabbed me right in the heart, and so that's what jumped me into this company.
Got it. So, well, you actually bring up, Austin, something that I want to ask. Either of you can respond, because there's probably a few listeners who might be like myself, like investing in agriculture. What is that? Why is it even necessary? Because we could, if we just pay attention to the news, believe that don't they get all the subsidies they need to do what they need? Why do they need more money?
Yeah, well, that's a good question, Jay. And two parts. Why would a farmer come to us to raise capital when there are government subsidies and fairly good terms for loans? That's all true, but it depends on what type of agriculture you're talking about. Agriculture is a really, really wide investment area. So everything from kind of row crops, corn, cotton, soybeans that people think about as you drive across the Midwest United States, to some really unique production methods like indoor aquaculture and vertical farming and specialty farming. And it's those latter types where that traditional ag credit system is not really optimized to provide them capital. So we get a lot of inquiries from people doing specialty crops and specialty production methods. And the other area where we're seeing a lot of demand from the farmer side is the emerging markets. So we talk to farmers all over the world on a daily basis, and those farmers in emerging markets just are not fortunate to have the established credit systems like we have. So they may have very good experience and may be very savvy business people, but they don't necessarily have the opportunity that the U.S. farmers have. So those are kind of our niches.
I would also add, Jay, that on the market side of it, that what ag is providing to the world is changing as well. When you look at the more industrious countries, protein in the diet increases as a country becomes more wealthy. So you think about some of the countries that are eating, the corn and wheat or rice as part of their diet. as that country and the standard of living goes up, they're adding things like chicken and tuna and beef, other protein sources. You think about how many people have transitioned over the last decade or so from dairy milk to almond milk or soy milk. So that changes what ag is providing to the world for their food source. You could go into a whole conversation about construction materials and how that's going. Timber obviously is always going to be something valuable to the world. So as the world changes, ag is changing as well, but it's providing this opportunity for investors to get into to see how their investment turns right into products that everyone on the planet uses. And we believe that that's going to be a profitable investment for folks.
Got it. So would this be more of a, social responsibility play, if I'm understanding you?
Yeah, there is certainly an element of that. I think a while back you had Joel Solomon on, and he was talking about sustainable investments and specifically organic food. And, I really enjoyed listening to that interview, but I think one of the things to realize is that, Joel is from a big investment firm, an institutional side firm. And for the individual investor who wants to get a little bit of this exposure of agriculture or production agriculture in their portfolio, there really weren't a lot of options. And that's what caused us to set up this company. But as far as sustainability, there is definitely an element of that in the deals that we're doing. So, for example, we're working with a development project to put an indoor recirculating aquaculture system in northern Nevada. And that is probably most of your listeners know that the fish populations all across the oceans are being depleted. And that's really a kind of an environmental disaster where these fisheries are collapsing and being overfished. So if there's a sustainable way to produce marine protein fish indoors with water that's recirculated, that's not wasted, and in a sustainable production method, that's an attractive for consumers, and that's also can be an attractive investment as well. So that's one example. Other examples are a lot of farmers are converting their land to organic to support the higher consumer demand for that. And we're talking to a lot of those folks. And then there's that specialty sort of production methods like indoor farming and vertical farming and aquaponics and hydroponics and you name it. People are growing food in many different ways now that they weren't 10 or 15 years ago. And there's a need for capital for those. And there's also a demand on the consumer side for organic, fresh, locally produced food and protein. And that's what we're doing is helping to meet that demand in a sustainable manner. So,
okay. Forgive my ignorance. All right. And probably, for oh my gosh, I can see you're like, wow, you probably get this question, but I just got to know. Because you said something that sounded really strange to me. You said converting their land to organic, like as in what kind of food were they producing before if it wasn't organic?
So I'll just say like a cattle rancher as an example. So this person is feeding those cows some sort of feed that he buys from his local co-op. He's probably got, so the grassland that he's got that they're constantly, pasture raised on. So he's probably putting fertilizers down to keep that grass growing quickly. So in the process of raising cows to take them to the market to be turned into filet mignons, every bit of that process is involving chemicals and fertilizers, and sometimes they're antibiotics that they're using to keep the cattle healthy. So in that process, none of that would be considered under the U.S. standards for organic. And so there's a lot of cattle operations that are feedlots as opposed to pasture raised. So those are specific things that consumers are getting more and more knowledgeable about. So if that rancher says, hey, I want to convert my land to be more organic, or maybe I want to have only grass-fed beef, which obviously pulls a higher price at the grocery store. So he has got to go through a process, and that takes time and capital, extensive amounts of capital to transition that land. So he's got to make sure fertilizers are not being dropped on that grass. He's got to make sure that the feed that he purchases from the store to feed the cows has also been raised organic, that it doesn't have chemicals and hormones and antibiotics in it. He's got to make sure that as that beef gets processed all the way to the plant, that it's not coming in contact with chemicals or detergents or things like that. So it is quite the process. There's obviously a demand for it, and there are plenty of farmers out there that see the benefits to the land itself to keep the land healthy, but also to provide a better product to consumers. And so we receive plenty of farmer inquiries that are, hey, I just need $1 million, and I'm going to turn my pasture over the next 3 years into an organic, beef producing operation. And so that's a typical scenario that we see every day. So that hopefully that gives you a better sense of what that means. It's capital intensive and it's labor intensive.
Well, it's really time intensive is what I was thinking when you said, because I was like, hold on, when you were talking, I was like, that's going to take, you can't just do that overnight. That's going to take time before that changes, its composition. And that's, I am assuming that time would represent a significant number of seasons or years of lost revenue.
Absolutely. So if you think about it, like a wheat farmer, if he wanted to turn his wheat field organic, if he did the entire field, he'd have to wait, I think it's 3 years to make sure that whatever chemicals or fertilizers that were in the land have kind of been dissipated. So the smarter, more industrious farmers will do pieces of their land over time, pull a third of it out of production, turn it into just kind of natural grassland, let it sit for a couple years, and then do the next third and the next third. So they don't pull their revenues down to zero. They kind of span that time out. And so when you're looking at 3 years, you're going to have to tighten the belt a little bit, or at least get some help from investors to make sure that you're still putting your kids through school. You're paying the insurance on the farm truck. Those costs are still going to be there, even though if you're not producing a portion of that land.
Well, yeah, and I guess as you were talking, I'm sitting here thinking it depends on your profit margin. A third of your inventory, for lack of a better way of putting it, or production capability, that could have been your entire profit margin, and now you're just barely keeping, your fixed costs under control.
Absolutely. And when you're doing traditional ag lending and borrowing from a bank don't want to hear that you can't make that payment because you're doing a transition. So that is why our model offers that opportunity for farmers to bring on the investors that understand this transition cost and will be happily rewarded once he's pulling in higher prices for his grain or his beef or whatever, because he's transitioned over to the organic market.
Got it. I'm having such an education right now on the business behind food, for lack of a better way of putting it. And I'm like, okay, but it's making a lot of sense because it's easy to make some parallels. And speaking of parallels, I really got to understand, how on earth is agriculture similar to apartment building? Hello there, entrepreneur. This is Jay Massey. I know that if you've ever gone over to the site, cashflowdiary.com, you may have asked yourself, where on earth do you get a domain name from? Especially as you are beginning to build your bigger, better, badder business, you need a web presence. You need the email address. You need a way for people to contact you electronically so that you can stop doing the @gmail.com game. Well, the good folks over at GoDaddy have definitely supplied us with every domain that we have ever used. So what I want you to do is I want you to go over to trygodaddy.com/Cashflow Diary. Again, that's trygodaddy.com/Cashflow Diary, because it's a quick way for you to get set up to capture your domain name the exact way that you want it. They got easy search functions, and most importantly for you is that you'll be up and running today. As I said, once you get started, stay started. Don't let small little obstacles of how to get your own domain name going stop you. So again, go to trygodaddy.com/Cashflow Diary, and let's get back to the rest of the story.
Yeah, Jay, I'll take that one because I've invested in both. And the first part is demographic drivers. So if you look at what does everybody need? Everybody needs a place to live, and everybody needs something to eat. So
yes,
the world's population is obviously growing, as Austin alluded to. And that's why you see multifamily units going up all over the country. It's also why you see new forms of agriculture going up that produce higher yields. But at the same time, as Austin mentioned, the amount of arable land can be shrinking as cities sprawl, and that urban sprawl takes away that arable land, which just makes arable land a more scarce resource. And that's why we see these novel production methods like hydroponics and aquaponics and things like that growing up. So the demographics is definitely parallel. I think if you just look at the finances behind, say valuing a multifamily apartment, multifamily building, people are looking at cost per door. Well, with agriculture, you're generally look at flatland agriculture, you're looking at a cost per acre. So there's some similarities there. Obviously, a farm is like any other business. They're producing profits and losses and net income, and that can be evaluated just like you would evaluate the valuation on a either via comparables properties or via the cash flow that agricultural investment is putting out. And you see a lot of economies of scale with multifamily buildings. The bigger the apartment is, the easier it is to manage. You have a staff, you have professional management, and a farm is no different. So we have a lot of farmers that come to us that are maybe farming on a small scale, but they want to increase what they're doing to realize those economies of scale. So I'd say if that puts it in perspective for people who may have an understanding of real estate, but not see why ag is just really another form of real estate.
Totally understood. I'm seeing the similarities, and there's two things that keep happening that I want to make sure that they happen in context from this point forward. You mentioned small scale, and then one of you said something to the effect of, I just need $1 million, as if that's a low amount, and it probably is, but we have no context for knowing what size transactions, occur. But what is a small scale farm? Like how big is a small scale farm?
Well, there's obviously definitions of what would be considered hobby farm or business farm. The operations that we typically deal with range between they're seeking capital in the area of $500,000 to around $4 to $5 million. Now, there's obviously some larger conglomerate industrial farms that operate in the $50 million, $100 million annual cash flow. So what we're talking about specifically for our platform is those family farms that are a small business that are looking to raise those amounts that I mentioned, and they have the ability to scale whatever their operation is to a point where they can provide returns to those investors. So that's kind of our window of what we're working with on a daily basis.
Got it. Now, you mentioned platform. So let's talk about harvest returns for a second. Would it be similar to other platforms where you've obviously got it sounds like you've got the farmer side and the investor side, and this is kind of where the two come together. Do I have that correct, at least on a basic level?
Yeah, that's exactly right. We're an investment online platform, much like some of the real estate platforms that are out there that will enable people to pool smaller amounts of money to buy a larger, say, apartment building or commercial office building or medical office building. Basically, we bring together pools of investors with smaller minimums, say $5 or $10 or $25,000, to take part in a much larger asset purchase.
Got it. And then you had made a distinction between a previous guest, Joel Solomon, on episode 449. I'm assuming the biggest difference is going to be what you just said in terms of your minimums. That's
exactly right. So we're basically doing farm syndication to simplify it. And our investment minimums are fairly small. So we're offering deals that are primarily directed to accredited investors, but to some amount, a limited number of non-accredited investors. And those investors are coming in with minimums that are, like I said, $5,000 to $25,000, say. And there's other places you can go. Obviously, the most direct way is to go out and buy your own farm, but most people.
I'm not doing that.
Yeah, right. Most people don't want to write a check or have the money to write a check for $2 million. And even if you do, you probably don't have the experience to get into it. And that's not something that you want to, people that are looking for passive cash flows, they want to invest in something where somebody else is doing that work. And that's what we offer.
Got it. So let me ask what could possibly be a counterintuitive question. If the majority of your investors on the investor side are accredited, why such a low minimum?
Well, Jay, we set that for a lot of reasons. There's some calculus that goes into it for the benefit of both the investor and the farmer. Obviously, we want to offer the least diluted investment available, and so we set that up originally because, like Chris had mentioned, to get into ag as an investment class, you had to be kind of the ultra high net worth level investors, and so the term democratizing agricultural investment is something that we typically throw around a lot, especially when we're face to face with investors at trade shows or farmers at ag shows. We want more people to have access to something that has been limited to the very wealthy in the past, and so providing that, pulling that power down from the top and spreading it amongst more of the populace. It allows for people to get involved in things that is profitable and it's educational, like you said, providing them a closer connection to their food source, their clothing source, their the home they're living in. We want more people, and we think more people should be involved in this.
And Jay, I'd add, we'd certainly like to bring in more retail investors at lower minimum, even lower minimums. But as you know, the SEC has very interesting and dynamic rules, and they prevent you from offering certain deals in certain manner. And I think most of your listeners are pretty well familiar with the accreditation rules and the SEC regulations for private placement offerings.
Well, what was really going through my head was at those minimums, it's almost a non-decision. It's like, hey, it's worth the risk. Let's find out, and so in my head, I was thinking, well, why wouldn't they ask for more? Because to actually make it more of a decision. So why is there difficulty in this? Is it just because people don't know that we can? Is that really the issue?
Yeah, I think that's a big part of it, and that's why most people have probably not invested in this asset class. We certainly realize that, although most institutions, pension funds, private equity funds, university endowments have a big chunk of their portfolio in natural resources. So part of our mission here is to educate the investors who are looking for passive cash flow and something that's diversified and in a unique way to invest in it. And so that low minimum allows you to put in a little bit in a deal, kind of dip your toes in the water and see what this asset class is all about. But it also, our platform allows you to invest across different types of agriculture with different risk and return profiles. So certainly you can invest at the minimum, or you can invest at the maximum. It's obviously the more the better, but we think that agriculture is an important part, and natural resources is an important part of someone's portfolio diversification, just like the institutions are doing with it.
Yeah, what Chris mentioned, Jay, having those minimums allows you to diversify. So you want to diversify your portfolio, obviously, and ag as an alternative investment is an option. But once you're in that sector, what our platform provides is multiple offerings with low minimums. So if you show up with, let's say you want to drop $50,000 into ag, you have the ability to look at several different versions of that and put 5 in one, 10 in another, 20 in another, so you can spread yourself out amongst your own diversification. So that was just part of that calculus as we figured out what would be the best route to go.
Yeah, no, I think I'm getting it. I'm kind of interested myself, and I've got a little bit more questions. Like, is this a form of direct ownership? Like, am I saying, hey, I want this particular farm that's producing this particular food, that type of thing, or product?
Yeah, that's exactly what it is, Jay. I mean, it's not necessarily direct ownership. You're not owning title to the farm. You're investing in an LLC that has a larger investment into that specific farm. So it's these aren't funds. You're definitely investing in a single farm or a single farm.
But
project.
The LLC owns a portion. The LLC that we're putting the funds in owns a portion of whatever that farm is, correct? Collectively.
Yeah, that's exactly correct.
Yeah,
we're actually working. These are equity deals,
awesome.
But we're actually working on our first debt deal, which we're really excited about here in the next couple of months, getting that one launched.
Awesome. I think I kind of like that. It might actually give me a reason to enjoy going to the grocery store. Now when it comes down to it, what would you say is why do people choose to say, you know what, let's put money into agriculture? Where does that come from? Because I know in my circles, that rarely like, hey, let's go put money into that. No one says that.
There's a few reasons. As a market investment, we talked about the demographics already, so I won't really elaborate on that. But the returns themselves are pretty interesting. So if you look at
let's talk about that.
Yeah, you look at just U.S. farmland; those returns have exceeded the S&P 500 over the long term. So the appreciation of the farmland is interesting, as well as some of our specific deals actually have higher returning sorts of projects. So the returns themselves are attractive. The diversification is interesting as well. So returns from agriculture are generally positively correlated to inflation. So we all know that we want assets that appreciate faster than the rate that our money depreciates. And agriculture is also negatively correlated to other financial assets. So we're talking about stocks and bonds primarily. So if you want to hedge your stock, your equities, and fixed income portfolio, agriculture is a good way to do that. And that's what these institutional investors are doing by bringing natural resources like farmland and timberland into their portfolios, is providing that hedge, but also looking for those long-term attractive returns.
Well, and that's kind of what I was trying to make a correlation in my head. Like, is this like a defensive play? Is this a growth play? Is this an income play? And I think it's kind of all of that, depending on what you want. Am I close?
For sure, yeah. These definitely are not sexy investments. We're not talking biotech companies or the latest app or whatever. But
right.
But if you want to build wealth over the long term by owning something that throws off an income and it's an asset backed by appreciating land prices, then agriculture makes a lot of sense.
Now, is it more of an investment in the land or in what the land is producing, or the business that's on the land, or is it kind of both?
It depends. It varies. So when we're talking about something like cattle operation, or Austin talked about grain operation, that's got a land component to it. But when you look at some of the newer production methods like aquaculture or hydroponics, you're just talking about the cash flow that business is throwing off and the returns that are generated from that type of operation.
Got it. Now, you mentioned something called vertical farming. That was a while ago in our conversation. I'm sure some of the listeners are like, what's that? If they're anything like me, that's what they said. So what's that?
Sure. Vertical farming is a trend where people are growing food in generally urban locations. So,
whoa, hold on. There's not enough room.
You got it. That's where the vertical comes in. It's you're going up, right?
Yeah, but up what? There's nothing to.
So obviously indoor.
Okay.
And there's various ways to do it, but one of the more common ways is racks. Mostly these operations don't involve soil, so we're talking something like hydroponics. Although there's different variations of indoor farming. We've also talked. So here's kind of an interesting trend that we've been thinking about. There's all across America is the death of malls and the death of retail is online.
Right.
Online retailers come into play and start growing. So you've got all this empty real estate sitting around. It's like, so you've got Walmarts where a lot of people used to have a job and now they're out of business, or a large mall where you've got all this retail. Says, why don't you grow your food there? And we're talking to some producers that are doing exactly that. And you talk about a compelling asset to invest in, is where you're taking something that is no longer useful to somebody else and reconverting it into a completely new operation that's going to produce food close to where it's consumed. Take away that miles. Sometimes, especially with organics, that food is produced overseas. So If you're talking about sustainability and impact to the environment, negative impact to the environment by trucking and shipping food thousands of miles versus growing it down the street in a local abandoned retail center, I think that's a pretty compelling story for the future of investing in agriculture.
So what type of food could be grown under these circumstances? Like, yeah.
Well, if we've talked to a lot of these guys that are putting the tech together to do these indoor facilities, they throw some pretty impressive numbers out, and they say, well, if you think about a head of lettuce out in the dirt in somewhere in California, and what it takes, the amount of water, the amount of inputs, amount of labor to do that, and they can almost at a 10 times scale produce those heads of lettuce because they're controlling their environment. They're not constrained by Mother Nature to some respects. They provide the nutrients. They provide the water source. They provide the temperature that the plant is growing in. So with these technologies, they can triple, quadruple, like I said, 10 times produce the same product, and it's healthier. It's less chemicals. And it, like Chris mentioned, it's right down the street from your house. It's not coming on a truck full of ice or refrigerant chemicals. It's literally right down the street.
That's cool.
The other interesting aspect from an investment perspective of indoor agriculture or controlled growing methods is the risk management piece. So investing is all about managing your risk, right? So if you're investing in apartment building, you want professional managers to be there. You want systems that are in place that reduce the variability on how you deal with tenants and how you collect rent and all those sorts of things. Well, agriculture is the same way. And if you can grow, say, vegetables inside a building where you're taking out the weather component, you're taking out the disease component and the insects, you can ensure that the risks are lower and they're mitigated, which obviously makes that a better investment with lower risk.
So everything you're saying makes it sound like, yeah, why don't we do that? Is it because the infrastructure is not there? The capital to build that infrastructure is not there? Is that really the holdback?
It's a different, there's a number of different reasons. One is, yes, the capital isn't quite there yet. And that's something that we're here to help with. Mm-hmm. It's fairly new. The technologies are fairly new, and adapting them is fairly new, and getting people involved in farming. So the average age of the farmer, I think in the U.S. is something like 58, I believe. It's increasing. Most farms are still family farms, even the large ones. Over 90% of the farms in the U.S. are still owned by families, which is great. But that younger generation, because they're coming out of college and they've got just an insurmountable amount of student debt, and they are not, even if they want to follow in the family farm business footsteps, they have trouble accessing that capital. And so, these indoor agriculture methods are attractive because there's a technology component. So that is attractive to, say, millennial generation. And we're really excited to be part of that whole trend as the food system in the U.S. is and around the world is evolving.
Well, I can imagine that farming doesn't make a great Instagram photo, so that's probably part of the challenge too.
Well, we've seen some very high interest when you show. I mean, if you think about someone that's living in an apartment in downtown Manhattan, that you'll see them put plants on their stoops or on their pedestals. There is a disconnect between a lot of the urban population and the earth, and so we get those photos from farmers where their hands are just black with the dirt or running red with the strawberry juice. Those things really resonate with some folks. And when you think about if you ever had that friend that liked to boast at the cocktail party about, oh yes, I own a piece of this winery outside of
right.
Monterey, California. Well, that's nice. Why not allow that for more people to say, oh yeah, I own a piece of a cattle operation in Montana, or I own a piece of a group growing tomatoes in an old Walmart in North Alabama. So there's definitely right. a connection there. There's definitely some interest in seeing how we're all kind of connected to our planet and to our food source.
Man, I like what you guys are up to. I like that you're enabling other entrepreneurs to go out there and be the best versions of themselves. And I'm sure there's a number of people who have listened this far and they want to find out more. What's going to be the best way for them to track you down?
Jay, the best way is just come to our website, harvestreturns.com. We've got some educational resources on there, a blog which talks about various aspects of investing in agriculture. And of course, we've got social media, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter. We're on all those platforms. Mm-hmm. And we're really excited about getting more people interested in investing in their food system.
Indeed. Well, let me be the first to say that you guys are doing some very interesting things. I mean, I'm sure you heard it in my voice, like, wow, there's a lot. I've just learned there's a lot that I just don't know. But before we end, I have a final question for you that I want to make sure that I get out there, because I would love to hear your answer. So, let's pretend for a moment that someone listening is actually going to, take that step. They are standing in front of what I like to call the superhero outfit store. They're ready to put on that entrepreneur cape and tights, and they're going to make something happen. Finally, something happen. Now, like I know, that when we get to those moments of decisions, oftentimes there's a companion with us, and that companion comes in the form of a voice, and that voice reminds us of who we're not, and it says things like, well, what on earth are you thinking? You're going to grow food indoors? That's crazy. Or you're going to invest in what? Nobody does that. I mean, it reminds us of these things. And for some people, they're related to that voice. So my question to you is as follows. If they're actually going to move forward and they're going to do so in the next 24 to 48 hours, what would you suggest that they do?
If you want to invest, if it's the person whose voice is telling them to diversify their portfolio and invest, come to our platform, look at our deals, review the documents, consult your financial professionals, and invest. That can easily be done in 24 hours. If you are a young person who is like, hey, I want to get even deeper and I want to start my own indoor hops growing operation to support the craft beer movement. We've talked to some of those guys. Start doing your research. Give us a call and let's talk and let's see how we can put that together and make your dream come true of owning your own business and connecting with the food system.
I like it a lot, guys. I really, really do. I definitely appreciate you taking your background, pulling that together, and playing to each other's strengths, and letting that ultimately result in something that's making a difference literally in the world as you guys go out there to do good. And we totally appreciate you taking the time to share your knowledge, your insight, and your wisdom here with us today at the Cashflow Diary.
Thank you, Jay.
Thanks, Jay.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, you know what time it is. It's time for you to move at the speed of instruction. What does that mean? That means get over to harvestreturns.com, because like I know, that was really cool. I mean, growing food indoors, and hey, I own a piece of a cattle ranch. That just sounds awesome. It flows right off the tongue. And the fact that you can do it for so little money, that's a really great way to get started and make that stuff happen. Ladies and gentlemen, it's been fun talking to you today, and I look forward to talking to you soon. Until next time.